How did I know? This is a question that I'm asked pretty often, so I figured it would be good to sort of chronicle this because I'm sure I'll be asked again one day, probably by my daughter again at some point. Everything was totally normal in my life. I was doing fine. I felt fine. This past Christmas Eve, I did what any good CrossFitter does on Christmas Eve, and I went to the box and did the 12 days of Christmas workout. It was a great workout, and I came home. I felt great, and I got into the shower. When I was in the shower, I just did my normal routine. I reached across, washed under one arm, and then reached across under the other arm and felt something. It was like I brushed against something kind of firm. It was the lump. And I felt it, and I knew it wasn't normal. I knew, I just knew it wasn't right. The thing is, it was firm. People ask me what it feels like. It was firm, odd-shaped, and it wasn't there the day before. So I was a little worried. I stood there in the shower, and I went through everything in my head. I also knew that it wasn't painful in any way, which is not necessarily a good sign when it comes to the possibility of cancer, because if it had been painful, it would have been more likely to have been perhaps a muscle tear. And oh, how I wish it was a muscle tear. But I stood there and decided, okay, don't panic. We just need to get this checked out. The problem is, it was Christmas Eve on a Thursday, and there was no way I would be able to see anybody or get anything checked out until the following Monday. Everything was closed on Christmas Day, then it's a weekend, and then we're back, things are back and open. So I didn't say a word to anybody. My 96-year-old grandfather and my parents were in town from Charleston, South Carolina for Christmas. Christmas Eve is my dad's birthday, and Christmas Day is my husband's birthday, and I didn't want anybody to worry. So I kept it to myself, and I kept sort of feeling myself up throughout the weekend, thinking maybe I made a mistake. Maybe that wasn't what I felt. But it didn't go anywhere. It was still there. So Monday morning, I went to my primary care physician's office, knowing that I didn't have an appointment, and knowing that it was only the last couple days of the year, so it would probably be crowded. Everybody's met their deductibles, and they're trying to get in those last-minute appointments. But I went there with a mission, and I showed up, and they tried to tell me to come back in 3 weeks because they didn't have an appointment available until then. This would be my message to anyone out there, as somebody who, as a healthcare provider myself, and now as somebody really going through the system as a patient. Never feel bad to be assertive about your own healthcare. You have to be an advocate for yourself, and that's exactly what happened at this moment. So when they told me that I could come back in 3 weeks, I knew that that was not okay. So I just simply, and as politely as I could, said I was not going to go anywhere, that I would wait to see the physician, and that all I needed was a referral for imaging. I knew they were going to have to do a mammogram, and I knew they were going to have to do an ultrasound. I've been working with breast cancer patients at Moffitt since 2007, so this was just standard. I knew I needed this. So they ended up taking me back, and sure enough, I remember laying there on the table, and I put my arm over my head like this, and she looked at me, and she said, "Oh my goodness, I can even see it from here." And I said, "Yep, I'm pretty confident this is not normal." So we had a little bit of an uncomfortable laugh, and she wrote some orders for me. We called about 7 different places. Nobody wanted to get me in that day because, again, it was the end of the year. But we finally got in, and at the end of the day, I had had the mammograms done and the ultrasound, and basically said, okay, send her to the breast clinic at Moffitt because it was questionable. So a week later, I went to the breast clinic. and they did some very invasive mammograms, you could say. As somebody who was 38 at the time, I've never had a mammogram. Breast cancer also does not run in my family. And I've always been a proud member of the Itty Bitty Titty Committee, so, it wasn't something that I was concerned about, honestly. Most of my male friends have larger breasts than I do. But I've learned that does not make a difference on whether you can get breast cancer or not. So I spent the day getting very close with a mammogram technician there. In fact, I think we might be dating now. I don't know. She hasn't called me. It's kind of weird. But I had all the things done, and then they did some ultrasounds, and then the radiologist met me and said that they found a lymph node that was enlarged, and they found another lump besides the one that I had found, and they wanted to do a biopsy on all three. So still same day, I'd gotten there at 8 o'clock this morning. It was probably about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Now they're doing a biopsy on me. I was completely by myself. I definitely recommend bringing somebody with you if you ever have to go through this. So they did the biopsy. I laid there on a table. They numbed it, and they stuck this really long needle into my underarm. If you've ever had a needle stuck in your armpit, it doesn't feel that great. But in this case, I couldn't see it. So, I couldn't feel it. So I watched it, and it was kind of like that Hungry Hungry Hippo game, like where it tries to grab the balls. Anyway, it's an old school game, but that's what it reminded me. I was watching it on the screen, and it was an ultrasound guided biopsy. So I watched them do it, and then I was very sore and bruised, and I went home, and then I waited, and they told me that they would call me as soon as they had the pathology reports back, and this was what was going to tell me, is it cancer or is it benign? So the next 4 days were the longest 4 days I think I've ever had to deal with. And I got the call when I was sitting in my office on a Tuesday, 2 days before I was going to leave for Wadapalooza to compete in the biggest competition I've ever competed in. And the wonderful nurse practitioner called me, and she said all 3 biopsies came back positive for cancer. So that was how I found out. And because the lymph node was positive as well, we had to start the ball rolling of getting a lot more tests done to make sure that it wasn't anywhere else in the body. Because once it's in the lymph nodes, it goes through the system. And that's also why the treatment plan started with chemo instead of surgery first, because in my case, it was already in the lymph node, so they had to attack the cancer before they treated it locally. So that was how I found out, and that was how my life changed starting at the beginning of this year. I hope that maybe this helped somebody, and if there's any lesson to be learned, just know that nobody's immune, and if you think there's something that just doesn't seem right, don't wait. Get it taken care of, get it looked at. It's better to be safe than sorry.